In this story, there was a man who had dreamt the same dream every day where he was woken up by a boy with golden hair and wearing a red scarf just sitting by the window. He was then asked if he was ready to leave. Leo was the boy in the dream. After the dream, a man watched Leo being challenged by a big, ugly brawler. The man jumped at Leo, calling himself Iron-Armed Danny. But Leo was too quick for him, and he landed a counterpunch that shook Danny's friends with fear. Leo was annoyed by them, so he decided to finish off the rest of the ruffians. As the white shirt man observed them silently, he thought to himself, this Leo isn't the person who he turned out to be. Lee Hee-ro, a Korean man, had a bulky upper body like an elephant and a slender lower body like an ant. He also had bulging eyes, an overdefined double chin, and square, sharp cheeks. The man's soul was transferred into the body of a minor character who appeared to be doomed to die after being defeated by the main character in a single blow. He was horrified to learn that he was now the antagonist of the story, and that he would meet the same fate as the other villains. Before that time, Lee was reading a book called Adventure King, which is a tale of a boy that travels across the world. A new, enchanting world wherein charming characters clash. After reading the story, Lee was disappointed to see a significant character get killed off early in the story. Lee's favorite character in Adventure King was the fallen knight Lucas, a cunning villain who had been in the top 3 of the popularity polls since his debut. Unfortunately, the author killed him off right before the climax of the story. After the death of Lucas, the writer began killing off other characters like a maniac, and he explained his actions with nonsensical bullshit. In his words, characters are meant to be single-use. After their appearance, it is entirely the character's responsibility, without working hard themselves. That's the end of their life. Lee was infuriated by the author's decision to kill off Lucas, and he felt that the author should have just kept him in the story. The story had been running for 10 years and had 60 volumes. Lee texted the author to express his disappointment, and told him that he was planning to stop reading the series after the author killed off Lucas. He finished his message by saying that if the author saw anyone selling the entire collection of Adventure King on eBay, it might be him. He then thought he might have gone too far, dropped his phone on his bed, and said that the author probably wouldn't even read his message anyway. Lee was reading comics when he received a message from the author. He was surprised because the author had never messaged him before. The author asked Lee if he wanted to try writing a comic. These messages were the first and last interaction that Lee would ever have with the author. And because of that, his life began to spiral out of control. Leo defeated another bad guy, then challenged the others, who slowly backed away. Lee was in a difficult situation, knowing that his soul was in the body of a bad guy. In front of him was another goon who faced Leo, who carries a devilish aura with him as he prepares to beat him down next. He then charged up his energy and punched them, which sent him flying through the air. Lee looked past the battle to see a sign that read, in italics, the starting point for Leo in Volume 1, Chapter 1 of Adventure King. As the system appeared above him, Lee saw his stats and realized that he not only died before the first chapter ended, but he also had to survive until the end of the story to secure his place in time. He gets mad reading the details of his mission and resents his maker for treating him like trash. Just after he showed his rage, his 2 buddies behind him saw this and pointed at him. They then used him as their fighter to battle against Leo like he was some sort of trump card of theirs. The men in black shirts boasted that their big guy, the brother of their boss from the city, could easily defeat Leo. Lee, who emanated a powerful aura, wondered how the author had managed to transfer his soul into the body of the bad guy. Leo, excited, asked if he would encounter more powerful foes in the city. Lee, knowing that the author intended to make this difficult for him, approached Leo with a sinister smile and a cocky laugh as he cracked his knuckles. Leo was asked politely by Lee if he wanted to enter the city. Leo smirked and prepared to fight Lee. With no other choice, Lee was about to give it his all and had no intention of letting the author have his way. The mood quickly changed as Lee stopped and was about to tell Leo something. But before he could, a warning flashed before him, covering his entire field of view. Leo was penalized and immobilized for 10 seconds. Leo clenched his fist, ready to fight Lee, but he was stuck in place and unable to move. If Lee did not move before Leo did, it would be the end of the side character. The fight between Lee the bad guy and Leo the main character continues. Leo throws a punch at Lee's face, but Lee quickly deflects it and blows a powerful gust of wind just inches from Leo's face. As Leo asks Lee why he is not attacking, he sees the bloodthirsty beast hidden within Leo's eyes. Lee also saw that the story had a predetermined plot in which a side character must endure a phase where the main character effortlessly beats him up. This made Lee realize that he had no way of altering the plot development even if he tried. Back to the fight, the black shirt guy saw how Leo threatened their leader, so he sent out the other goons to fight him instead. All were quickly dispatched off, as Leo just spun around and somehow he managed to knock them out. Lee watched his friends get beaten up while thinking that this chapter was just to show how strong Leo was. Lee started to think about how he could survive while Leo unleashed his fury, but then he had an idea and decided to stay hidden during the fight. Lee thought that it would be acceptable for someone else to be hit and knocked around instead of him, since the guys from earlier had been pressuring him to fight Leo. In other words, Lee was carrying the weight of everyone's expectations as he slowly but surely waited for his turn to fight, but that in and of itself is proof of Leo's strength. We then see the black-blooded forearm, who was on the ground after being beaten by Leo. The other man grabbed Lee's arm and inquired about their next move. He then called Leo a lucky one and stated that he was unable to assist his friends because he was currently suffering from a stomach ache. Lee explained that he was unable to fight Leo due to not being at his peak strength. Leo noticed that Lee's legs were shaking as he spoke, but Lee assured him that this was simply because he was more eager to take a bath than to fight. Lee then told Leo to move on and find something that he truly desired. Leo was somewhat perplexed, but he quickly understood and asked Lee if he truly did not want to fight him. Lee let him go without a fight, and Leo accepted it graciously. The two eventually went their separate ways without incident. Lee called Leo a brat and vowed to give it his all the next time they met. And with that, the first chapter came to an end, and Lee was informed that the author had calculated his final character evaluation. He was then instructed to examine his character information. He noticed that he had been given a bonus trait called bluff. Lee was intrigued that he could receive a reward after completing a chapter, but he was also pleased that he had received some recognition, even if it was only a small amount. He looked at the bottom of his traits, and saw that his chances of reappearing were 0%. The deletion of the character, Bad Guy 3, was still pending. However, to his surprise, the system postponed his character deletion until Chapter 3 as it began to calculate the result. Lee was overjoyed to receive some good news from the author, so he began celebrating like a wild dog. However, that would only last him until Chapter 3, so he needed to come up with a plan to prove his character's worth before then. Lee turned around to see that his friends were fading away, having fulfilled their duty as side characters. He realized that if he didn't prove his worth as a side character, he would end up like them. He clenched his fist tightly as he came to terms with the fact that he was really in the Adventure King's story, all because of the author's message. The author's words, "A character must struggle with all they've got in order to survive," rang in his ears as he was transported to another world. He suspected that this might be a form of revenge against Lee, but for now, he had to survive and follow the mission's instructions. He was unsure of why he had been sent to this incomprehensible world, but he knew that he had to do whatever it took to stay alive. Lee needs to increase his chances of reappearing, which are similar to his survival rate, in order to achieve his goal. He plans to raise his chances to at least 50%, and then maintain that level no matter what. He then gets frustrated as he vows to rip the author to shreds after he's done with all the shenanigans. He calms down for a moment, and thinks for a way to prove his worth, and thankfully, the world he currently exists in is a familiar one. As he continued to ponder about his next plan, he immediately remembered something about his character points. And just before he could finish his sentence, the system panel interrupted him and informed him about the guide to the character shop. The message went on to say that he could not use the character shop while in the middle of a chapter. It then displayed the categories of items in the shop, which were character settings, chapter, and special data. For the first part, it showed him the details of the character settings. Lee can use his character points to change his character's background, abilities, appearance, and more. He can also exchange 25 points for a 30,000 gold bounty wandering rabbit, or 70 points for an adventurer from Conch Village. He then looked through the list of characters he could purchase with character points earned from completing chapters. Each character had a unique background and inherent abilities associated with them. Lee's day was brightened when he saw Lucas, his favorite hero, listed among the characters on display. His face flushed as he slowly placed his hand on Lucas' character, but he was denied access because the character's status was too low. Lee was warned that he needed to improve his character's stats in order to gain extra points. He decided to start with a character named Copycat Acrobat, who could mimic the abilities of others if Lee met a specific condition. Copycat Acrobat is a villain who often tricks Leo. He is a cheat character who can copy the skills of the main character. However, Lee is not worried about this, as he has already read the manhwa and knows the hidden conditions of mimicry. Lee needs to improve his character before he can become Lucas's sidekick. He can now change and add more settings to himself since he has completed Chapter 1, which means that he no longer has to be the bad guy 3. After careful consideration, he decided to skip Chapter 2 and go straight to Chapter 3. Opening his chapter category log, he decided there was no point in going through Chapter 2 since Leo was busy fighting other side characters. He then purchased an item that allowed him to advance to another chapter, thinking that he had good reasons for doing so. Lee was given the option to choose which chapters to read. He said that he wanted to stack the deck in his favor by choosing chapters that he knew would help him succeed, since he couldn't change the plot once the chapter started. Furthermore, Leo's first companion, Kiriko, appears in Chapter 3, which had a greater impact. The serialization of Adventure King had resumed after he chose the Virgin City. This chapter features Kiriko, the mad gunman from the Virgin City. He is the first companion and rival of the main character. It is an unwritten rule in action manhwas that these two characters must fight each other. Lee and Kiriko had a falling out in the past, but they made up and became friends. They then started a bombing campaign together. Now, Lee is in a desert town by himself, and Kiriko is nowhere to be found. As Lee walked past the gentleman, he mentioned that Kiriko was a notorious villain in the Virgin City, but it was unfortunate that he had not been able to meet him. His last destination was a tavern, as he had his reasons for wanting to meet Kiriko instead of Leo. The reason for this is that Kiriko is the main character of the story. He then sat down at the table and thought about how he could increase his chances of reappearing by playing the role of Kiriko's assistant. He became stressed, knowing that he had done nothing in the past 2 days, and was worried that he could die at any moment. The waitress at the tavern greeted him with a large glass of beer and welcomed him to her establishment, which was known as Madame Rose Marietta's Goodnight Moon, but she preferred to be called Rose. Lee looked up at Rose's stunning face. Rose felt uncomfortable under his gaze, so he quickly looked away and apologized. He complimented her beauty, saying that she had a well-designed character, unlike his own body, which didn't even have a name. He then asked her where the guy who sat by the corner went. Rose replied saying that no one likes to sit in that place since it's a corner seat. After hearing the reason, Lee was ticked by it and thought for certain that Kiriko was always sitting by the corner table. He suddenly snaps and slaps his head as he remembers that it's all because of the story development. During Chapter 3, it begins with Kiriko pointing his gun at the enemy, then he shot him down because he was harassing a lady. Lee realized that everything that had happened in that chapter was because Kiriko's enemy harassed Rose. Lee was enraged to learn that Kiriko had never met Rose since the chapter had not yet begun. Rose looked perplexed as she watched Lee try to figure out where Kiriko might be. She smiled at him and pushed the beer towards him, saying that he would feel better after having a drink. Rose proudly claimed that this honey beer specialized in easing the minds of the stressed, so Lee picked it up while thinking that eating and drinking manhwa stuff was a necessity in shounen. And for a moment, Lee was transported to paradise after taking a sip of that beer. After finishing the beer, Rose asked Lee how he liked it. He complimented her while thinking that he should start trying new things from now on. He needed to increase his chances of reappearing and prove his worth in order to survive. And if he wants to go back safely to the original world, and do the most important thing, it is to beat the living hell out of the author's ass. After he made up his mind, the system panel popped up again and informed Lee that the Chapter 2 had concluded. Later that day, Lee arrived at the Virgin City Tower, the Mafia's headquarters in the city center. Lee approached the tower guards cautiously, believing that they might know something since they were Kiriko's enemies. Lee was stopped by a guard who asked him what his business was. Lee replied that he was there to see the manager, but the guard refused to let him in and asked for his identification. Lee then warned the guard that he should be careful, as he claimed that the situation was dangerous. Lee's special ability, bluff, had grown stronger, as evidenced by the guard's reaction when he told them he was an executive from the Red Scorpion. The guards were so shocked that they dropped their jaws and immediately agreed to let Lee into the tower. Red Scorpion is a fictional organization that is responsible for evil deeds and is often featured in shounen manhwa. Lee was fortunate that his new ability helped him, but in an unfortunate turn of events, a man arrived and saw Lee about to walk up to the tower. Lee turned around, thinking that no one was in the building. But then, Kiriko appeared, holding a man by the face. Lee had heard that the bastard was in the building, but it turned out that there were only a bunch of underlings. The two guards greeted Kiriko with hostility, but instead of confronting him themselves, they pressured Lee into doing it for them. Kiriko smirked, thinking that Lee was just a thug and that he should know that Kiriko had connections to the man they were angry with. The guards then step in front of him after being insulted by Kiriko, and decide to beat him up themselves. But in mere moments, the two guards were knocked senseless. Lee only stood as he didn't expect the guards to get taken out in one hit. Lee was the only one left alive, but he wanted to say something to Kiriko. Lee declared that he was no longer a member of the gang, but Kiriko was sure that it would not make a difference in his fate. Lee denied Kiriko's assumption, saying that he is a secret agent working for the International Council. Kiriko told him to stop lying, as he had already heard Lee admit to being an executive at Red Scorpion. Lee defended his actions by claiming that he was only trying to disguise himself. He added that he knew Kiriko would come to the tower because Kiriko was chasing the bloody mafia. Kiriko was captivated by his story and urged him to continue. Lee informed him that he had made himself notorious in order to eliminate someone, and that he was now attempting to assassinate all of the mafia members who were associated with that person. As he continued to talk, he wondered if his plan was actually working. Lee was about to give Kiriko the critical information when the mission panel interrupted him, saying that the beginning of Chapter 3 was drawing near and the character shop was about to close soon. Lee stopped speaking in disbelief after hearing this. Kiriko wondered why Lee had suddenly stopped. Lee was puzzled as he was unaware that the second chapter had ended. But knowing that Kiriko is still there right beside him, Lee instantly realizes that Leo had inherited the main character's buff. Unbeknownst to Lee, Leo had inherited these special abilities. His abilities allowed him to immediately begin the next chapter without being restricted by space or time, as the entire plot existed for his sake. He was momentarily confused, then realized that he was trapped inside the manhwa. It was a given in a manhwa that the setting would immediately change between panels. After a bit of realization, Lee shouted at Kiriko, startling him. Lee pulls off a serious face and persuades Kiriko that they can't stay at their current location much longer. Kiriko thought he was speaking nonsense. Kiriko, tired of Lee's antics, aims his gun at Lee's chest towards his heart, telling him that a while ago he just said that he was an executive for the Red Scorpion, and now he's a secret agent who belongs to the International Council. Kiriko was suspicious of Lee. He had never met Lee before, but Lee seemed to know Kiriko's real identity. Kiriko suddenly pointed his gun at Lee's face and demanded to know Lee's real identity. Lee stuttered as he tried to answer. Lee was unable to say the words he thought in his head, so he gave the best answer he could. He teared up and explained that he was simply a man who had high hopes for Kiriko. This answer confused Kiriko. Lee gets a hold of Kiriko's gun and wholeheartedly tells him to believe him for now since something is about to happen. Kiriko was slightly irritated that Lee's been doing whatever he wants for a while now, and questions him about what's gonna happen to him. Lee countered that the matter at hand was not about him, but rather about Kiriko. He explains Kiriko's matter at hand in full detail. It would appear that Kiriko was attempting to eliminate the mafia members who had been sent to kill him, while also searching for a specific individual among them. It was a blonde-haired guy, who fired 2 bullets in Kiriko's stomach. Kiriko was taken by surprise and pointed his gun at Lee, questioning where he got the information from. Lee informed him that he had conducted some research here and there, and then rhetorically asked him if he was simply going to allow a scoundrel to run amok. Kiriko was successfully convinced, but he asks Lee on how to defeat them if he can't find them in the first place. Lee, with a confident expression, smirks and replies that he could help him since he is his assistant. Lee informed Kiriko that the enemies were currently at the plaza. Kiriko was taken aback and questioned Lee how he knew about the plaza. But Lee interrupted him, shoving him in the back and telling him to go immediately. Lee tells him to properly take care of the enemy this time. Kiriko looks back at Lee, dumbfounded on what just happened. But Lee insisted that he goes since he will definitely find him later. The flow of the manhwa continues as the panel of the manhwa switches to a black and white comic with a scene of Kiriko successfully finding the enemies thanks to the help of Lee intervening with the story. The spectators watched Kiriko bring judgment to the evildoers while Lee was hyped to witness the legendary moment unfold in front of his eyes. As Kiriko was about to unload Lee on his enemy, he was suddenly interrupted by Leo telling him to stop. Kiriko refuses and immediately shoots his gun, but suddenly, Leo goes cliché protagonist moment. He moved in front of Kiriko and executed an axe kick, causing the ground to shake violently and random explosions to erupt from nowhere. Dust and smoke quickly accumulated in the area. The smoke dissipated, revealing Lee, who was just eating popcorn, confused by the events that had happened. Continuing with the fight, Leo tells Kiriko that he's insane for aiming a gun at a human being. Then he tries to body kick Kiriko, but he blocks his attack with his gun. Kiriko shoots at Leo, telling him to stop being a brat and mind his own business. Leo was struck by some of the bullets, gritting his teeth to endure the pain. He performed a backflip to dodge the bullets and regain his position. In just a second, Leo vanishes into thin air. Kiriko realizes that he's one of the quick-footed types and knew he was a troublesome opponent, so Kiriko tries to cast a skill called Devil's Bullet Paralysis, but was instantly stopped the moment Leo appeared behind him. Kiriko turns around and realizes that it was already too late. Leo's, with his eyes and fists glowing crimson red, punched Kiriko so hard that it caused an explosion with a red thunder cackle to appear above the impact. Lee was so shocked at the damage the punch caused that it caused him "Damn, Daniel!" The manhwa switches again to black and white, and Kiriko obviously took some kind of damage from that punch. The panel switches to Leo, who also took some damage, presumably from Kiriko's skill. The air around the both of them gets serious, so to end the battle, Kiriko tells Leo to dodge his unique ability called 6 Scorching Shots, if he doesn't want to die. Leo tells him the same with his unique ability called Catastrophe Exterminating Lightning. Sounds about right. Kiriko, with a serious expression, reminds Leo again to dodge his ability if he doesn't want to die. Leo, with a confident expression instead, retorts that he's quicker than him, so it's better to worry about himself instead. Lee realizes that if he attacked Leo in Chapter 1, he would have been fucked and erased from the manhwa's existence. The battle continues. Both Kiriko and Leo dashed forward to go head-on-head with each other, resulting in a nuclear explosion feat Oppenheimer. Both of them can be seen standing in front of each other after the explosion. But the battle concludes with Kiriko's defeat. Lee was amazed at the comparison of seeing the fight happen in front of his eyes instead of the manhwa. The author claimed that Lee was an extra, so he sustained no damage, since we all know extras are overpowered. Suddenly, a shout from afar can be heard. It was Rose, who just witnessed the event. She was mad at Leo for attacking Kiriko when he was just trying to save her. Rose sits beside Kiriko's body and tears up since she thought he was dead, wondering how this could have happened. To her surprise, Kiriko, barely alive, tells her that he's alive. Rose couldn't contain her happiness and hugs Kiriko after hearing the good news. Lee and the spectators were happy to witness the scene unfold in front of their eyes. Lee suddenly becomes serious, and is determined to get into the cutscene no matter what. The panel switches to black and white again. So it begins with Lee calling out to Leo, gathering some attention to the people to explain that Kiriko wasn't dead. However, there was only one problem. Lee can't fit or be seen properly in the cutscenes, so enjoy. Lee clarified to Leo that Kiriko had only done all of that in order to save his beloved Rose. Leo was perplexed by his misunderstanding of Kiriko as the villain, and Kiriko informed Leo that he had simply misunderstood. In the next panel, Rose, who is currently love-struck with Kiriko, questions him if he's really gonna leave, while Lee was blocked by the speech panel. Kiriko tells Rose that he's gonna depart with Leo to go around the world. Rose tells Kiriko to take care as she tears up missing her loved one, while Lee gets cock-blocked again. Both the two, Kiriko and Leo, bid their farewells as they depart towards the sunset. While Lee was dumbfounded not being able to get into any of the cutscenes. He knew he was doomed after that, so he tears up since he remembers all of the trouble he went through just to get a cutscene, but it didn't work either way. Lee resigned himself to his fate of character deletion. But suddenly, Kiriko stopped and turned around to thank him. He told him that he was a bit of a chatterbox, but he was still helpful. Kiriko tells Lee that he'll remember him as Jutting Chin.
Bro, I'm really about to get your pic.
Lee smiles and hopes that they meet each other again sometime in the future. With the event fully progressed. Chapter 3. Virgin City Mad Gun comes to an end. The system updates the evaluation of Lee or Mr. Bad Guy 3 after it was done. His name is now Jutting Chin.
Bro, I'm really about to...
A special trait which was talks a lot was added to his status. The system determined his result, and his fate of character deletion was postponed until Chapter 7. 114 points were given due to increase of his recognition, and 2 points were given due to increased chances of reappearing. The reason for the postponed deletion is because of the cutscenes. In the writer's point of view, Lee didn't get exposed as much since he didn't really play any impactful role within the chapters, so he was just chilling. Lee knew he was safe until Chapter 7 and let out a sigh of relief. While lost in thought, he overheard a bunch of side characters talking about the unique abilities within the fight earlier. Lee realized that the real part of the story will now begin since more characters with unique abilities and higher classes who are stronger than Kiriko and Leo will appear as the story further progresses. If he falls behind their abilities, it will also be harder to keep up with the current story, resulting in him getting deleted. He scratches his head out of irritation for getting a few points. But he realized something. Chapter 7 will be held in Goldham City, a place where they sell special drugs that give you abilities. He was confident that if he could get his hands on those, he would surely secure a place in the story. After that, if he collects 1,000,000 gold for the special drugs, everything's gonna work out. Not in real life, buddy. Unless you've got connections. Lee snaps back to reality and becomes hopeless, realizing that he's not in a manhwa to collect 1,000,000 gold. But you're in a manhwa, right? Suddenly, a sign with the text of Bloody Mafia HQ appears in front of him miraculously. Lee realized something, and stood up proudly. Kiriko told him that he has gotten his revenge before the chapter has ended. And that was the fight with the Bloody Mafia HQ earlier. So he immediately sprints towards the Bloody Mafia's headquarters, and after reaching the HQ, Lee opens the door to the HQ, panting heavily. Due to the deaths of Bloody Mafia HQ, the guild was now ownerless and empty, leaving the resources fully intact with a stack of cash and piles of gold bundled in their storage room. With all of this money, would Lee be able to guarantee his safety in Chapter 7, or would he fall to his fate after being given a good dealing hand to him? Hope you guys and girls enjoyed part 1 of the manhwa. Like, comment, and subscribe. Hope you all have a good day and peace.